You have said something in that just really got to me about telling our joy how it can be improved upon. I am my own worst critic.
Yes.
Even when we get done recording this interview right now, my brain will naturally say, well, what should I have done different here? And how could that be better? My brain naturally it goes there. And yes, we can continue to grow, but not to miss the joy. So thank you for reminding me, Dr. Carol, about that. And then when you talked about our brain naturally goes to negativity, doesn't media know that? Haven't they made trillions of dollars off our brain's penchant for negativity? When did you last celebrate? I mean, really celebrate on purpose. I'm Dr. Carol. Thank you for joining me. We are coming to the end of Mental Health Awareness Month. Every now and then, I talk with one of our guests who challenges me, where my heart feels really called up, challenged in the most positive way, and this was one of those conversations. We often, when we talk about mental health, we have this month talked about anxiety and depression and post-traumatic stress disorder and all the problems, and they are real. And there is real help available, and I pray that you have just experienced some positive hope and things that you can do. But we rarely talk about the positive. Today we are talking about celebration. My guest today, Nicole Zasowski, is a licensed marriage and family therapist and an author. She lives in Connecticut with her husband and 3 children. She has been through some stuff, and I'll let her share some of what she has experienced. But what we're focusing on today is celebration, not in the sense of waiting for something good to happen, but in the sense of doing it on purpose. Nicole's book, What If It's Wonderful? Release Your Fears, Choose Joy, and Find the Courage to Celebrate is available. You'll find that link as well as others available under this video. But this changed the way I have thought about celebration and delight in some very significant ways. I think it will you as well. So, Nicole Zasowski. Nicole Zasowski, what a pleasure to have you on the program today. Welcome. Thank you.
Oh, it's my honor to be here. I'm so excited.
We are wrapping up our series for Mental Health Awareness Month about mental health challenges and what that looks like for followers of Jesus, and talking particularly with people who have been through some of that, who have a bit of a story and are in some measure on the other side, who are walking forward. And you've done some great work in thinking about this. You are a therapist and talk with people about this all the time. But let's just start with hearing a bit of your story. What does this look like for you?
Yes. So I recently released a book called What If It's Wonderful? And it's about finding the courage to celebrate.
Yes.
And some people assume I wrote that book because I had a lot to say about celebration. But the truth is that book was much more born out of a season that could be largely characterized by change and loss. We had a big move across the country to a place that we knew nobody, and the move was very much a surprise and happened quickly. So there was a lot of loss in community, and really held up the mirror to some of the things that I had put my security in that were not sustainable and had promised more than they could deliver. Things like my performance and perfectionism and my reputation, and really had a reckoning when my identity was wrapped up in everything I couldn't bring with me to the East Coast. And little did we know that that just kicked off a season that was really painful for us. We discovered a medical diagnosis for which there's no cure, that causes me to have about a 60% chance of losing a baby to miscarriage when I get pregnant. So that led to 5 miscarriages in so many years, and several failed fertility treatments, and just the chronic nature of that pain and trying to wrestle with hope, and is hope a good idea, and what is the point of hope? um,
Yes.
and so, when you go through a loss, whether it's a loss of a loved one or a betrayal, maybe your story looks really different than mine, or it's just a season that looks really differently than you hoped or thought it would.
Hmm.
There's the loss, there's what happened, and then there's the cost.
Yes.
And the cost is the impact to our sense of identity and or our sense of security and safety. And what took me a really long time to realize is that part of the cost of that really hard season for me was that my joy, when we did start stepping into a season that had a little more breakthrough and good
Hmm.
news,
Hmm.
I realized that my joy was accompanied by a lot of fear.
Yes.
And it felt easier not to hold the gift than to hold something that might break. So I
Mhm.
held my joy at arm's distance. And I was so sad when I realized, really grieved, really, that yes, I have experienced a lot of loss in the last decade of my life. But a lot of the loss I've experienced is because of my inability to fully engage with the life that's right in front of me.
Wow.
Because I was practicing disappointment and rehearsing disaster, and pessimism and cynicism were my ways of really trying to manage the vulnerability of joy. And as a therapist, of course, and even as a friend in my community, I just started to hear more and more stories that were really different than mine, but where joy was really scary for people. And the research actually says joy is the most vulnerable feeling we feel,
Wow.
because it is when you hold something, it is automatically accompanied by the possibility of loss. And so that just kicked off my research in both scripture and neuroscience
Yes.
studies to understand celebration as a practice, and what does joy actually mean, what does celebration actually mean, and how do we do this well.
Mm. So many things you said there. You talked about, rehearsing or practicing disappointment and rehearsing disaster and the vulnerability of joy. Those are those are pregnant phrases, if I can use that term.
Yeah.
And I can hear in your story too that the OBGYN part of me, the recurrent pregnancy loss, the repeated miscarriages, and then you do have, I believe, 3 children now,
Yes.
and I can imagine um, a bit of wrestling. Even, can I enjoy this baby when I've lost so many? There's that even in the family and the relationship when this child is here and alive.
Yes. No. And I describe this vividly. Just holding my firstborn for the first time
Mhm.
was the best and scariest
Yes.
experience I've ever had, because it was such intense joy, and yet it was hard to trust the
Mm.
gift and the promise when I had known so much pain. Um, and every one of my 3 kids has taught me a little something different about hope and celebration.
Mhm.
And then too, I connected with so many people in the midst of my sorrows, people whose stories were really similar to mine. And how do I celebrate,
Yes.
knowing that I'm so keenly aware that not everybody's story has turned out like mine. And really, it was important to me as I counsel and talk about this idea of celebration, that we don't just view celebration as something we do when we get what we want, or when the story turns out how we think, or how we hoped it would.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for saying that, because you're
Mhm.
right. We don't have guarantees of circumstances changing in this life.
Mm,
Um, but you talk about, and what if it's wonderful, about the discipline of delight,
yeah.
that it's not waiting for circumstances to change, but that discipline of delight. I thought that was such a descriptive phrase of what we can choose to be. Um, just why can we do that? Because there
Mhm.
might be some cynics and pessimists, I'm sure there are, who are listening saying, I mean, hey, just give me a break.
Yeah, no, I was one of them, so I can really relate to that. Um, yes, I at first when I started researching celebration in particular, I quickly learned that it is more of a discipline and what we how we tend to interact or think of celebration is either a reward for an accomplishment or a reaction to good news. And we think, well, I'm perfectly willing to celebrate. I just need a reason to do so. I'm waiting for a reason.
Mhm.
Um, and I was so annoyed when I learned that or realized that celebration is not just a reward or a reaction, but it is a rhythm that we practice that helps us cultivate more joy in the life that we are already living. Um, and while I was annoyed at first, I realized how freeing that was and empowering that was because I would go into transitions, particularly like a new year is a great example.
Sure.
You know, there's this transition to a new year. There's lots of talk of goal setting and dreaming and
Mhm.
vision casting. And I would be so anxious because I would think, well, I hope I have a reason to celebrate, or I hope this year gives me a reason to feel joy. And it was so much more empowering to realize no, there's practices available to me now, regardless of what happens or regardless
Yes.
of what kind of season I live, that these are things I can practice to cultivate joy in whatever comes. And it's not about toxic positivity and
Yes.
using joy to cancel what it's hard. We are not about that. But it does help me experience both the pain and joy differently when I practice celebration.
Mm. You say, few among us simply drift toward joy. That
Yeah.
just, that got me when I
Mm.
heard that. Because
Yeah.
we don't. I think for most of us, for
Mhm.
most humans, we don't drift toward joy. It does take being intentional.
Yeah, left on neutral, the brain leans negative. And there's a few different reasons for this, just a few of them. One is the hedonic treadmill. And this is a phenomenon in our brain that means that our brains rapidly adapt to joy. So, that gift or news that you thought could make you want for nothing else, there's this moment of thrill, and then it quickly fades into the background and leaves us wanting more.
Yep.
The second is our brains are just stickier with painful
Hmm.
information.
Hmm.
They're very efficient and they only want to pick up what they think they're going to need. And unfortunately, those everyday moments of connection with our loved ones or noticing beauty in nature, whatever that is, are not things that your brain naturally thinks are important. So they're tempted to discard or dismiss those moments and move forward. A third thing I thought was really interesting in my research is that we have this tendency as human beings to tell our joy how it can be improved upon. So I always give this example of a presentation. You know, say that you give this presentation and you feel great about your delivery. You can tell you're connecting with the audience. Maybe you get some compliments on your way back to your seat and you sit down and you feel so satisfied. And then you think, oh, it would have been better if I used that story. Or they said I was a good speaker, but they didn't say I was a great speaker. You know, we tell our joy how it can be better. And these are just a few things going on in our brain. So, yes, to drift toward negativity or pessimism or cynicism, whatever it looks like, all we need to do is nothing. And it does it does require intentional practices to carve a new neural pathway in our brain that helps us do it differently.
Mm. You have said something in that just really got to me about telling our joy how it can be improved upon. I am
Mm.
my own worst critic.
Yes.
Even when we get done recording this interview right now, my brain will naturally say, well, what should I have done different here? And how could that be
Yeah.
better? My brain naturally it goes there. And yes, we can continue to grow, but not to miss the joy. So thank you for
Mhm.
reminding me, Dr. Carol, about that. And then when you talked about our brain naturally goes to negativity, doesn't media know that? Haven't they made
Mhm.
trillions of dollars off our brain's penchant for negativity?
They
It
sure
just,
have.
yeah, it's what all of us go to. So the intentionality of celebration and finding joy. You've alluded to a couple, but let me just give you opportunity to comment on a couple or a few of the things that you have incorporated in your lifestyle to be just to celebrate on purpose.
Yeah. No. So, what was really important to me in terms of the celebratory practices that I included in the book was that I wanted them to be doable,
Mhm.
and I wanted them to be accessible and available to anyone walking through any kind of season.
Right.
So some people think, well, this sounds great, but I'm not really in a celebratory season. All the more reason to practice these. My favorite, it feels a little bit like picking a favorite child, but I I do like this one. And can I tell you,
Yes.
I don't like to ask readers or listeners to practice anything that I'm not willing to do myself. And this one has really, really changed my life. And it's so simple. It's called savoring. And the way that you practice this is you just pick one moment, and I'm talking bite size small. So for me, it might be when I'm rocking my daughter to sleep, or when I see the sunbeam catch my son's blonde hair as he plays in the backyard. I had a friend who was raising four teenagers, and just the fact that she, her husband, and her four kids were all sitting around the table together at the same time was something she wanted to savor. And then you just take that small moment and you ask your five traditional senses what they're going to remember about that moment.
Mm.
So, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? And what do you feel? And that helps your brain to capture that seemingly ordinary moment, savor it, celebrate it in a way that it can carry it forward and recall it later, and not dismiss or discard that moment of joy.
Mm. Yeah, that makes me smile inside.
Ah,
And just as I have been reading about and listening to things about brain science,
mhm.
building that new pathway in your brain, um, it becomes less awkward the more you do it. That pathway becomes more accessible.
Yes, yes. I think we tend to find what we look for. I give this an analogy often, but when the pandemic started, I was desperate for a way to entertain my two wiggly little boys when everything was shut down, including playgrounds and
Yeah.
outdoor spaces. And so we took to the Connecticut coastline to look for sea glass. And it's become our family's favorite way of spending time together. And I look at these jars of literally thousands of pieces of sea glass, probably tens of thousands at this point, and I see the way that God has woven friendship and community and laughter into our family in a season that we would have all probably written differently.
Mhm.
But I mention that because it's a beautiful analogy to me now when we go to look for sea glass. Um, we find it's rare that we don't find at least 100 pieces.
Wow.
And I don't think that would have been the case in our early days, but we are so trained for what to look for in terms of shape and color and texture, that finding those pieces has become easier. And I think joy and delight are the same way, that once you start to practice these celebratory practices, your brain is more, not only practices them more naturally, but you see more opportunities to do that.
Mm, beautiful. Um, I can imagine one of our listeners or viewers might feel like, well, I am around negative people all the time. I keep getting pulled down.
Mm.
How can I hold on to something like this when everybody else discounts it or isn't wanting to join me?
That's a great question. I think committing to your own practices. But I think the practice of Thanksgiving is a really good fight against that feeling when we feel like we're surrounded by negativity and maybe we're even tempted to let it change our own lens on a situation or
Yep.
our life. It's so easy. I think about that analogy. It's a lot easier for people to pull us off the table than for us to try and stand on the table and pull people up. So, and, to a certain degree, you might want to have a boundaries conversation with yourself too, and think about when you're saying yes and when you're saying no to different people in different conversations. But I think the practice of Thanksgiving can be kind of contagious. We talk a lot about gratitude in our culture, and I'm glad the research is clear that gratitude does increase our joy.
Mhm.
It helps us notice and name what is good in our lives. What we don't often talk about, and I found this so interesting when I was researching celebration, is that the practice of Thanksgiving, actually expressing the gratitude that we feel, whether it's to God in our prayers or to another human being, um, doubles the joy that we
Wow.
would glean from gratitude had we simply felt it in our hearts.
Wow.
So if you feel grateful, say it. And that will double the joy that you would have gleaned had you simply felt grateful in your heart. And I think there's a contagious element to that, particularly if you're doing this with those people that tend to be a
Mhm.
little bit negative.
Mhm.
And if you can just look somebody in the eye and say, this is the difference your presence makes in my life. And here are the ways I have grown and felt encouraged because of our friendship. Your joy will be doubled, but also hopefully their joy will increase just receiving that affirmation.
Yes.
And I find the practice of Thanksgiving really can cut through our own negativity or other people's as well.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. I will sometimes tell couples that I talk to who are struggling and unhappy with each other. I will sometimes give them an assignment to each look for something you're grateful for about your spouse every day. And not only look for it, but tell them,
Yes.
voice it, because
Mhm.
we all like to do things for which we get warm fuzzies. So
Yep.
not only are you going to notice more, but they're going to want to do more of that.
Yes. No, absolutely. You'll notice more. It's naturally positively reinforcing.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
And yeah, it's a great practice in marriage as well.
Yeah. You make a difference in What If It's Wonderful between celebration and escape.
Yes.
And I think that's an important distinction to talk about. So uh, enlighten us.
Yeah, celebration can often be misbranded as something that is merely to blow us off steam or, kind of help us emotionally disconnect.
Mhm.
And there is a profound and important difference between escapism and celebration. Escapism is a reaction to pain that disconnects us from our own emotional experience, other people, and God. Not that God goes anywhere, but that, that we
Right,
feel that disconnection.
right.
Um, And celebration, on the other hand, is an action based on truth that is connecting with our emotional experience, other people, and God. And often we want to sort of categorize behaviors. We want to say, okay, well, what's celebration and what do I do that's
Yeah.
escapism? And the more helpful question is actually taking it at the root and saying, what am I looking for by
Mhm.
engaging in this behavior?
Mhm.
Because, with a few obvious exceptions that are obviously unhealthy, as a fly on the wall in your life, I may not know which you are engaging with. So based on the behavior alone. So the more helpful question is, am I looking to engage more deeply with my life, or am I looking to check out and numb some pain that I'd rather not feel right now?
Mm. Um, that is so clear and
Mm.
such a big difference on the inside. And
Mhm.
thank you for moving beyond simply actions
Yeah.
to where it's coming from.
Mm.
Yes, actions make a difference, but much more important is what's going on the inside. And that brings me to a final thing that Nicole, I want to talk about, and that is how God sees celebration. We
Mm.
think of Jesus as a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and he was. But
Mhm.
you say this, approaching the end of the book, but Jesus didn't come to suffer. He was willing to suffer so that we could ultimately celebrate with him. His suffering was not the aim, but a means to an end.
Mhm.
That sounds so important. And talk about that
Mhm.
for a minute.
Yeah. So when I looked at this biblically and took a 30,000-foot view, I realized that both the Bible and Jesus's life are bookmarked, bookended by celebration.
Yes.
We have the creation, God rejoicing, calling us and his creation good. Then in Revelation, we are promised that there will be no more tears.
Mhm.
That celebration is the end of the story. That what is dark
Yes.
today is not going to be dark forever.
Yes.
And then Jesus's life, he's born, and the shepherds are rushing, the angels are singing, the wise men are bringing lavish gifts. All these beautiful images of celebration. And then, of course, the resurrection,
Right.
him being united with us in celebration, conquering death once and for all. And I understand why people say that Jesus came to die for our sins. But I think it's an important language change to say he was willing to die. He was acquainted
Yes.
with our grief,
Yes.
so that we could celebrate a God who knows us intimately and is with us in both our pain and joy, and that we are not separated from him
Yes.
because of Jesus's sacrifice. And his ultimate end goal was to celebrate that reunification with us.
Mm.
And I think that's a helpful paradigm shift to keep in mind that he came the way he did. He saved us the way he did so that we could feel confident that he knows our human experience and all the suffering and sorrows that entails.
Yeah.
And that we get to celebrate that those suffering and sorrows are not the end of the story.
Mm. That reminds me of, I believe it's Hebrews 12 too. Jesus, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame. Even he went through that on purpose for the celebration, for the
Yeah.
joy.
Yeah. What a great verse to highlight that truth. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. Well, Nicole, I feel like there's so much more we could unpack, but let me just give you a moment to invite people to where they can find you and your book, What If It's Wonderful?
Yes. So you can buy What If It's Wonderful wherever you like to buy books. Certainly, it's available on Amazon. And your local bookstore can order it for you if they don't have it. Um, you can connect with me on my website, which is just Nicole, Nicole, Zasowski, Zasowski.com. And there's a lot of free resources that accompany the book that are still available for your personal gatherings at home and to help you process the book. And then Instagram is the social media platform I hang out the most, and I'm just at Nicole Zasowski there.
Mm. We'll make sure all those links are under this video and in the show notes to this podcast. I have been blessed,
Oh,
Nicole, and I have felt challenged to be intentional about celebrating the discipline of delight. I have been challenged in the most uplifting way.
mm.
Thank you for highlighting this. And what a great way for us to um, end our series for Mental Health Awareness Month with this just truly joyous option that all of us have. So thank you for doing the work to bring this to us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Friend, I want to challenge you to today, before you go to bed tonight, to use that exercise of savoring that Nicole talked about. One of those moments that you can find, and I know you can find them in your life today, and go through the five senses as she talked about. Record that in your memory. Make that a small discipline of delight that you start today. And then check out the links under this video to the book, What If It's Wonderful? Release Your Fears, Choose Joy, and Find the Courage to Celebrate, and Nicole Zasowski's material. I am certain that if you adopt this discipline of delight, that it will change things for you. God is a God who delights in us, and He doesn't wait until our circumstances change. It doesn't wait until we're perfect. But Scripture says He delights in us. We can follow His example. And I am so grateful that Nicole has given us some practical ways to do so. I want to thank you for being part of these and watching. I love to hear from you. You can use the contact page on our website to send me a confidential message if you choose, or you can leave a comment under this video. And I welcome those. Love to see that you are watching and that this means something, and a comment or a question. I want to encourage you to subscribe to this channel as well, so that you can get our regular ways of connecting like this. Thank you, and until next time, may God bless you.